How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Aleph, Daf 31 of Shechita Chullin. Friends, yesterday's Daf I recorded about an hour ago, and it was getting close to Shabbos. Today's Daf is an hour later, or 2 hours later, I don't know. It's getting even closer to Shabbos. So I, once again, don't have slides. I apologize, but there's not like that many slides for that would anyways need for this daf. It's going to be a great daf, friends. We wrap up the Mishnah we began at the end of the daf yesterday, where we were talking about slicing through necks and that how long the knife needs to be. So we're going to wrap up that discussion about how long the knife needs to be. And we will get to a new Mishnah. In the new Mishnah, we discuss Shechita without kavana, meaning if a knife falls off of like a ledge or something and lands and in the meantime slices through an animal's neck perfectly. So what are the nafkaminas in terms of kavana for Shechita? And then we get into, so kind of the theme, once we hit this new Mishnah, the theme for the rest of the daf, I kind of wanted to get to the next Mishnah, which is on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, but you know, Friday is just a race around the clock, a race against the clock. So we're going to get all the way to the bottom of Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, just not the extra 10 lines until Lamed Beis, but all good. We'll have to do it tomorrow. Anyways, once we hit the Mishnah, the topic becomes kind of kavana for Shechita, and then an interesting topic about going to the mikveh and different kavanas when going to the mikveh. What is kind of the baseline requirements, if baseline kavanas, if any, what's it good for? So that's going to be the discussion really until the end of the daf. So Chevra, come join me. Let's have a great time learning Daf Lamed Aleph, Daf 31 of Masechta Chullin. Here we go. Friends, we begin. Daf Lamed Aleph, Amid Aleph, about 6 or 7 lines in to the Amid at the 2 dots. Ayoshoichet v'hitis v'chu le Amr b'zera melot saver v'chutz l'tzaver o ki doki. Let's take a look at our Mishnah from Daf Lamed Amud Beis towards the end yesterday. 4 lines into the Mishnah. Hitis asarosh b'vas achas psula. Okay. Hayashoichet v'hitis asarosh b'vas achas im yesh b'sakim melot saver k'sher. So we had said that if a person is slicing, and not back and forth, but just forth, right? He slices forth. And when he finishes slicing forth, he has cut through everything he needs to cut through in terms of at least rov of the 2 simanim. So we had said, Im yesh besakim melot saver ksher. If on the knife there is the length of the neck, it's ksher. The question is, what does that mean, the length of the neck? We already discussed it yesterday on the Mishnah, but now we're going to see it in the Gemara. Reb Zera says, Reb Zera melot saver v'chutz l'tzaver. It means that the knife needs to be long enough for the width of the neck and more than that. Right? Melot tzaver, the width of the neck, v'chutz l'tzaver, and extending past the neck. So ibayilu, the question is, what does this mean? When Reb Zera says melot tzaver v'chutz l'tzaver, the width of the neck and outside of that, what does that mean? Melot tzaver, right? So ibayilu melot tzaver v'chutz l'tzaver kim lot tzaver. Dahavlu trey tzavari? Is it saying that the knife needs to be the width of the neck, and also v'chutz l'tzaver kim lo tzaver, and also extending past the neck, also the width of the neck, i.e., twice the width of the neck? So the length of the knife needs to be twice the width of the neck in order for you to be able to shecht doing just one long slice? Or maybe what we're saying is the entire length of the knife just needs to be the width of the neck and another shtickle. Tashma come in here. If he was sheicheting, if he was slaughtering, and he sliced through 2 necks, bivas achas, at once. Im yesh bisakim melot saver echod kosher. And says the Mishnah that if the length of the knife is equal to the width of 1 neck, it's kosher. So my melot saver echod. What does it mean? That I don't understand. You're slaughtering 2 necks at once, and yet the length of the knife needs to be equal to the width of one of the two necks. So I don't understand. If we say it just literally means that it needs to be the width of one of the necks, if we're saying, if Reb Zera is saying that even when it's just one animal, you need the length of the knife to be equal to the width of one neck plus some. So b'shtei behemoths, now that we're talking about two animals, i.e. two necks that are lined up one after the other, sagilu kimlot tzaver echod, the width of it being just one neck is sufficient? Can't be. Right? If for one animal that has one neck, Reb Zera is saying that the length of the knife needs to be the width of one neck plus some, it's impossible that what the Mishnah is saying is that when you have two necks, one after the next, and you're trying to slice through both of them at the same time, it just needs to be the length of the knife is the width of one of the two necks. Makes no sense. And rather what it means is that the length of the knife needs to be equal to the length of the two necks plus the length of one of the necks in addition, i.e. the length of three necks. Right? However many of these animals you're slicing, whether one, whether two, we haven't really talked about three or four, I don't know if that's allowed, but whether one, whether two, the knife is going to have to be long enough that if you want to slice in just kind of one slice, so it's going to have to be long enough that when you are done slicing, there is the knife extends past the necks, the equivalent of the width of one of the necks. So we see that we're talking about the width of one of the that the knife extends past the necks, the width of one neck, i.e., if we're talking about slaughtering one animal, the knife is going to have to be twice the length of its neck. If we're talking about slaughtering two animals at once, it's going to have to be 3 times the length of one of the necks. So this is all about if you just want to be able to shecht in one slice. If you just want to be able to just do one long slice and complete the shechita like that, that's when you need a long knife. However, if you want to just be going back and forth, even a scalpel is sufficient. Says Rav Menashe, be'izmol she'ein lo karnaim. Says Rav Menashe, however, when we're talking about using a scalpel, it's a scalpel that doesn't have any kind of decorations on it. Apparently they would, I didn't see like a photo of this. I can't tell you exactly what it looks like. It could be that there's different scalpels look differently, but it seems that their scalpels would have some kind of decorations on them, some kind of things that would stick out, horn-like things, maybe towards the end of the blade or something like that. And so if the scalpel has these kind of decorations on them, we have to be concerned that it'll get in the base Shechita and start tearing things up. So they can't have these horns on them. Rav Achabre says what about a needle? Can you shech with a needle? Just kind of scrape with a needle? So a needle, when you keep on going back and forth, it's going to poke and tear. It's going to be a mess. But what about a leather worker's needle? A leather worker's needle, I think I probably would have made a slide for it, but we're in a rush over here. So I will just make words. I will explain it the best of my ability. Imagine a screwdriver, but instead of the end being a Phillips head or a flathead, it comes to a point at the end. And also, instead of the sides being round, the sides are sharp. The sides are sharp. They're knife-like that you can cut things. And can you use it to cut a neck of an animal? So Amalei Tanina, so Menashe says, well, we learned in our Mishnah, afilu kolshu, right? What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says, aval b'holich ve'evi, afilu kolshu, afilu be'izmol kshera. Even a kolshu, anything, even a scalpel. So what's that kolshu? Right? It says afilu izmol, but it also says afilu kolshu. What's kolshu? Ma'alav machta de ushkefi. Is it not saying that even a leather worker's needle, or I think it's called an on, I think, a leather worker's on. Lo ismo. No, the kolshu is talking about a scalpel. Ismo be'ejagatani, but it says kolshu afilu ismo. It says scalpels. Kolshu must be something else. Parushe kamifarish. No, it's explaining. My kolshu ismo. What is the kolshu, it is the scalpel. This also makes sense. Because if you think that kolshu is a reference to this leather worker's needle, hashta machta de ushkefi sharia, if this leather worker's on is permitted, ismo mibaya, certainly a scalpel would be permitted. Right? If the leather worker's on is permitted, certainly a scalpel should be permitted. So ismol, it's not so simple actually. We could argue that even if the Mishnah is coming to include a leather worker's on, we still might need to teach about the scalpel. Because ligzer ismol she'ein lo kanaim atu ismol sheyesh lo kanaim. I might think, well, we said that a scalpel that has those horns on it is problematic. So I might think that maybe you can't use any scalpels because out of concern that you might use a scalpel with horns. Komaj malon. So what it's saying is that you can even use a scalpel. We're not concerned about the horn factor. So you could argue that kolshu is going to include a leather worker's on, and that the Mishnah then taught us about scalpels to say you can use a scalpel, just make sure it doesn't have any horns on it. And now we get up to the next Mishnah where we discuss Shechita without kavana, and that will lead into other discussions about tvila, mikvah without kavana. Okay, to begin with Shechita. Nafla sakin, if a knife simply fell down, it rolled off of a ledge or something and fell downwards, v'shachata, and sliced right through the neck of an animal, perfect shechita, but entirely happened by fluke, no human involvement whatsoever. Even though it was a perfect shechita, psula, it is a perfectly pasul shechita. Shene'emar, as the Bible says, v'zavachta v'achalta masha ata zovech ata ochel. You eat what you slaughter. You don't eat what you didn't slaughter. If the knife just falls off, the wind blows and blows a knife off the ledge and the animal happened to be at the right place in the right time to become kosher, it's not actually going to become kosher. Okay, right, you need some kind of human involvement. Now, Taima de Nafla, says the Gemara is medayik. Okay, so because it fell on its own, the wind blew it off the ledge or whatever it is, that's why it's possible. He pila who, but if a person knocked it off the ledge, the shechita will be kshera, even though this person didn't have any intention to actually do a shechita. He just had intention to knock a knife off the ledge. It would be fun. Turns out, an animal was in the right place at the right time. All good. When the Mishnah says that it's possible, it's because the wind blew it off the ledge. But if a person knocked it off if a person pushed it off the ledge, works, even though he didn't have any intention for shechita. Man tana de lo ba'inan kavana l'shechita. Who is the tana who says we don't need kavana for shechita? Amarav Reb Nosani. Rava says it is Reb Nosan the son Ditani Oshaya Zeirud min Chavraya. There's Rashi gives two suggestions for what this name means. Either it means Oshaya Zeira de min Chavraya, he was the youngest of the Chevra, or it means his name was Oshaya Zeira and he was part of the Chevra. Either way, Zarek Sakin le Noi Atza be Koisel says, so Oshaya Zeirud min Chavraya, he teaches the following brisa that if one threw a knife, like a dart of sorts, if one threw a knife, the noatza b'koisel, to stick it into the wall, v'holcha v'shachata kidarka, and on its way to the wall, it passed through the neck of a sheep. So perfect shechita. Reb Nosson says gewaldig, enjoy the sheep. Enjoy the lamb chops. So Reb Nosson says gewaldig, right? He intended, right? You have a person who threw the knife. Sure, he didn't intend to slice the sheep's neck open, but you have a person who threw a knife, ended up being a perfect shechita. Great, it works. It's kosher. The Chacham say not going to work. It's possible. Hutani lavu amar la. Oshai is the Irumin Chevraya taught this brisa and he taught about it. Amar la, avu amar la halacha Reb Nosson, that the halacha is like Reb Nosson. So Rava says that we see from here that Reb Nosson is the one who says that by Shechita you don't need kavana. It does need to be done by a human, but even without kavana, it's acceptable. One second, we already heard Rava say this in a different context. It's not that we learned in the first Mishnah of Masechta Chullin, that all of them, Rashi says, it's talking about Cher Shechita v'Kayin. If you remember, that was a big discussion at the beginning of the Masechta. It says Rashi, we're talking about Cher Shechita v'Kayin. Shechita, that if they slaughter, now they have no das. They obviously, we can't assume that they have any kavana. And yet, if they slaughter, and others are observing to make sure that everything, practically speaking, is being done properly, it is a kosher shechita. And we say, who is the Tana who does not require kavana for shechita, and therefore the shechita is kosher as long as we're observing and making sure that everything is being done properly? And Rava says it's Reb Nosson. So why do we need both scenarios? Why do we need to have the scenario of the dart, right? A person throws a knife against the wall and it passes through a sheep's neck on the journey, as well as the Cher Shechita v'Kayin. Why do we need two scenarios where we're saying that you don't need shechita by, that you don't need kavana by shechita? We need them both. If we only have the scenario of the Cher Shechita v'Kayin mishum dika michavin l'shum chaticha ba'olam. Well, they may not have had kavana for shechita, but they did have kavana to cut something. They did have kavana to be cutting the throat of whatever they were cutting. But over here, where he's throwing a knife against the wall, he didn't have any intention to cut anything, and then passes through the neck of a sheep. That was completely unintended. So maybe that would be too problematic. At least they intended to cut the neck of an animal. Here there was no intention at all for that. So maybe it would not work. So therefore we're saying no, it even works by the throwing the knife against the wall. And if we only had the scenario of throwing the knife against the wall, mishum dika'asi mikoyach ben das. We say it's a kosher shechita because at least the knife is being thrown by a person with das, by an adult with das. Aval awesome. The shechita is being done by somebody who has no das. The shochet has no das. Maybe it's unacceptable. Tzricha, therefore we need both cases, both the Cher Shechita v'Kayin as well as the person throwing a knife against the wall. That in both cases we say, you see, there was no kavana for the shechita, and still it is a kosher shechita. But remember that Mishnah had said, if like there was completely no kavana, no human involvement at all, like the wind blew a knife off the ledge or something, that's a different story. But as long as a human was involved, it could be a shaita, it could be somebody who's just throwing a knife against the wall. If it results in a kosher shechita, it is a kosher shechita. And now we get into an interesting discussion about mikvah. Itmar, it was stated, nida shene'ensa v'tavla. If a woman was a nida and she landed in a mikvah, that was not her intention, but she landed in a mikvah. At the end of the daf, we are going to discuss how did she land in a mikvah. But she landed in a mikvah, even though that was not her intention. So Lemaisa, she went to the mikvah, but without kavana. Okay? So, Nida Shenensa V'Tavla, a Nida who ended up in the mikvah without intending to be in the mikvah. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav says, Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, even though there was no kavana, Tehora Libeisa, she is permitted to be with her husband. She went to the mikvah, she can now be with her, she's muteris to her husband. Obviously, assuming that she was no longer a nida, that the 7 days were over, and she's no longer a nida, and she then fell in the mikvah, she's muteris to her husband. Vasura lechol bit truma, but she can't eat truma. She can't eat truma. We're going to get into this a little bit later. There is a Mishnah in Masechta Chagiga that describe almost five levels of going to the mikvah for stuff. There's going to the mikvah for chulin. For example, if you want to, if you're makbid to eat even chulin in a state of taira. So there's kavana, going to the mikvah with kavana for chulin. The next level up is meiser sheni. Above that, there is trumis. Above that, there is kachim. And above that, there is to be able to handle the mechatas for a para duma. So we're saying that she fell into the mikvah with that unintentionally. She's permitted to her husband. We're going to discuss why in just a moment. But because she didn't have any intention, the mikvah is not going to work for truma. That's a higher level. Doesn't work for truma. Now, Rabbi Yochanan Omar af lebeisalo tohara. Rabbi Yochanan says, 1 second. There was no kavanah when she fell in the mikvah. She can't be with her husband either. She's going to have to re-dip, this time with kavanah. Omar le Rav Rav Nachman says, Rav to Rav Nachman, Rav says Rav to Rav Nachman, I don't understand Rav's Shita. What's Rav's Shita? Rav says she's permitted to her husband. Now, Anida, sleeping with Anida is a chiyuv kares. We're saying she was Anida. She fell into the mikvah without any kavanah. All good. She's now she's permitted to her husband. This is something that if she's Anida, it's a chiyuv kares. We're saying because she fell in the mikvah, she's no longer Anida. She's tahora. She could be with her husband now. The chiyuv kares is over. But she can't eat truma. What do you mean she can't eat truma? Truma is misa b'dei shamayim, bad stuff, but not as bad. Kares is worse. Rashi says, the kares chamer min misa. Kares is more stringent than misa b'dei shamayim. The yom of nichrasim, because your life gets cut short. V'zaru nichras, and your children's life gets short. Kedichsiv aririm yiryu. You're going to be childless. Kares is an absolute balagan. So says Rava to Rav Nachman, I don't understand Rav. She's permitted to her husband, which means that the chiyuv kares is over, yet she's not allowed to eat truma, which is a lower level of misa b'dei shamayim. L'Rav da Amar Tahora Levesa, that she's allowed to be with her husband, Basura lecho b'truma, but she's not allowed to eat truma. That doesn't make sense. Arvon kares hutra. If kares is over, Isser Misa Mibaya, certainly eating Truma, which is an Isser Misa B'dei Shemayim, which is lower level, certainly that's over as well now that she fell in the mikvah, no? Omar Lei, so Rav Nachman responds and he says, Bai lechulin hu, v'chun lo bai kavana. Okay. So Rav Nachman says, look, here's the difference. The difference is that her husband is like chulin, kilu. I'm sure he's a great guy, but there's nothing on the list of Meiser Sheni, Truma, Kachim, Kilu, Mechatas. So he's just a regular guy. A great guy, but a regular guy. So you don't need kavana for chulin. And therefore, when she falls into the mikvah without any kavana, it's enough for chulin. For truma, however, it doesn't work. As I mentioned in the Mishnah in Chagiga, there's chulin, one level up is Meiser Sheni, another level up from there is truma. As we're going to learn about later on, that you have to have, if you didn't have kavana for truma, well then you can't eat truma. So you don't need to have any special kavana for chulin. She fell into the mikvah, it's enough for chulin. Her husband's chulin, she can be with her husband. She didn't have kavana for truma, she can't have truma. Uminat tema, how do we know that you don't need kavana for chulin? Tisnam, we learn in the Mishnah, Masechta Mikvos. Gal, a wave crashes over shore. Shenitlash uvo arbaim soya v'nofal ala adam v'ala. You have a person on the shore, and a nice big wave comes and lands on him, lands on any vessels that were over there. Tehorin, he's now tahor. The vessels are now tahor as well. My love, adam do me the kalim. Well, let's say that we're saying the wave landed on him and landed on vessels. And we're saying they're both tahor. Let's say that they're tahor in similar ways. Makelim delo michavne, just like the vessels obviously aren't having kavana, they're inanimate. Af adam nami lo by kavana. So a person, for him to be tahor, at least for chulin, won't need any kind of kavana. Just like the vessels don't have kavanah, he doesn't have to have kavanah either. And the wave falls on him, he's tahor for chulin. Mimai, 1 second, how do we know that that's the correct interpretation? Dilma biyoshiv mitzape oskina nemosa yitol shagal. Maybe it didn't take him by surprise. Maybe he was waiting for that wave to fall on him. And finally, he saw the wave, he says, wave, here I am, fall on me. Maybe mamish had kavanah. V'chelim dumi the adam, and the vessels are like him. Ma adam de ba'inan kavanah, just like he needs to have kavanah. Avkelim nami de kam mechavin lehu adam. Sure, obviously the vessels are inanimate, but he can have intention that, I want that the wave should fall on these vessels so that they will become pure. So says the Gemara, I'm not convinced that this Mishnah about the wave is going to be the proof that for chulin we don't need kavanah. I'm going to chap a shluk of water and we'll go weiter. And if you're going to say, and if you're going to say, well, duh, obviously if he's sitting there waiting for the wave to fall on him, he's going to be purified by that. Not so pashut. Ma'odetema, 1 second. I may have thought to say, ligzo mishum chardli shel geshamim. I might say, no, it doesn't work by a wave. Why? Well, just like a chardli shel geshamim. What's a chardli shel geshamim? Chardli shel geshamim is if you have rainwater that's running down a mountain, flowing down a mountain. You can't be tovel in that. The Mishnah in that same Mishnah Mikvah says if you want to be tovel in that, you're going to have to somehow stop the water from flowing. Put up some kind of a dam or something, collect 40 sai in one spot, but as it's flowing, it won't work. And since that doesn't work, the rainwater flowing down the mountain, you can't be tovel in that. So maybe we'll say you also can't be tovel in the wave. So we say, no, you can be tovel in the wave. Inami, alternatively, ligzor roshin atu kifin. Alternatively, I may have thought to say that that the wave won't work because the wave has two kind of parts to it. There's the head of the wave that crashes down, but there's also the roof of the wave. Now you can tovel in the head of the wave if it crashes down on you and crashes down your vessel, sure. But if you kind of stick your vessels into the roof of the wave while it's crashing down, that doesn't work. So again, inamin ligzor roshin atu kifin. I may have thought to say that, you know what? The head of the wave can't be matayr, just like the roof of the wave can't be matayr. Kamash malad dilo gazvinon. So it teaches that we don't make that gezerah. Okay, so we suggested that it's talking about where the guy is at. He does have kavanah. He's waiting for the wave to land on him, to land on his vessels. And it's not obvious that that's okay. I may have thought to say it's not okay, just like the rainwater flowing down the mountain is not okay. Or I may have thought it's not okay out of concern for you might try to tovel stuff in the roof. No, it is okay. How do we know that you can't be tovel in the roof of the wave? Is that the wrong word? Do we have any surfers? Our friends in California, do you know about roofs of waves? You know about roofs of waves? Diana, I once went with a friend of mine to one of those beaches there in San Diego. There were a lot of people surfing there. We were just boogie boarding. That was fun. We were boogie boarding over there. I don't know. I don't remember if I saw waves with roofs in there. When we were there were these people, I think their friend died. So they were doing this thing where they go out to the water. Diana, you know what I'm talking about? They were doing this thing where they go out to the water, and I guess that's what they do when their friends die. They go out to all the chevra, they go out to the water. And I guess a commemoration kind of thing. The surfers. So v'lomat belinon bekifin. So the Tanat, Desani, we learn in the Brisa. I think of Tosefta. Matbilin beroshin ve'en matbilin bekifin. We could be tovel in the head of the wave, not in the roof of the wave. She'en matbilin ba'aver, because you can't be tovel in the air. the roof is extended over the air, you can't be tovel in the air. But once the wave kind of crashes down, it's grounded on the earth, and you can be tovel in that. Ella, chulin de lobai kavana mias mi nalan. No. So back to our original question. How do we know that for chulin you don't require kavana? We tried to prove it from the wave, fail. So how do we know that for chulin, even without kavana, you're tar for chulin? This nan that we learned in a Mishnah in Masechta Machshirin. This is at least the third Mishnah we're learning from Masechta Machshirin, maybe even the fourth. Baruch Hashem, Machshirin. Perish enough amas amoyim. That if fruits that are not yet mukhshir lekabel tuma fall into a channel of water, ufashat mishayadav tmeos vinatlan, and somebody who had tamei hands stuck them into the channel, not because he wanted to clean, not for any, he just wanted to pull out, he didn't want those fruits in there, so he wanted to pull out the fruits. The result is yadav te'aros. His hands, after plunging them into the, right, after dipping them into the channel of water in order to remove the fruits, well, his hands without any kavana are tahor. Uferis einon b'chiyudin, and the pears are not mukhshan lekabel tuma. He didn't want the fruits in there. He didn't want them to get wet. He didn't want the fruits in there. So he pulled out the fruits. He had no intention for anything there, right? The fruits fell into the water. He didn't want the fruits in there. He only put his hands into the water in order to fetch the fruits, which he didn't want them to be in there. The whole thing was unintentional. We're saying his hands nonetheless are tahor, and the fruits are not mukhshel lekabel tuma, because as if you remember, we learned recently from the first Mishnah, Masechta Machshirin, it says that you need to have, right, there has to be, right, l'ratzon bein batchila, right, ilu, right, tchilaso l'ratzon or sofa l'ratzon, right? You have to have intention either at the beginning, to intention for the water to be used for vessels, or you have to have intention to be machshir, to clean the fruits or whatever. For the fruits to be there. In this case, there was neither. There was absolutely no intention. So therefore, the fruits are not mukhshel lekabel tuma. V'im b'shvil sheyutchu yadav. But if he says, you know what, I'm going to wash my hands, let me retrieve the fruits and I'm going to wash my hands while I'm doing that, well then yadav taharos, his hands are tahor because he stuck them in the channel of water. Uferes b'chiyutan, and the fruits are mukhshel lekabel tuma, because this time you said, oh great, I actually want the fruits to be there because it's an opportunity for me to be able to wash my hands. So because he wants the fruits to be in the water, they are mukhshel lekabel tuma. So we saw in the Reisha that when there was no intention at all, they are still tahor for chulin. So there's a support, there's a proof from a Mishnah in Machshirin that even without kavana, it works for chulin. Let me chapash another shluk of water. We'll go weiter with a machloket, with a kasha that Rava asked to Rav Nachman. It's the Rava of Nachman. Rava asks a kasha to Rav Nachman. Toval lichulin. If a person, this is a Mishnah from Chagiga, Masechta Chagiga. Toval lichulin. If a person goes into the mikvah, as I mentioned, there are levels of mikvah going. Are you going to the mikvah for chulin? Are you going to the mikvah for ma'aser sheni, truma, kadshim, mechatos? So if he was going in to the mikvah for chulin, v'huchzak l'chulin, and when going into the mikvah he had kavana for chulin, also l'ma'aser, so he's permitted to eat chulin. He can't eat ma'aser sheni though. That was not his intention. Huchzak in lo, huchzak lo. So are we not saying that because he dafka had the intention for chulin, that's why he can eat chulin? But if he didn't have any intention at all, then he wouldn't be able to eat chulin? Lo achi ka'amar. Or maybe one say, maybe that's connected to the prayer. One say, huchzak in lo, huchzak lo. Period. Hachi ka'amar. No, this is what it is saying. Even without kavanah, it does work for chulin. The distinction is, the point is that because he did have intention for chulin, The point is that even though he had intention, the point is that when he has intention for chulin, it doesn't work for meiser. That is really what the Mishnah wants to highlight. Even though he had intention for chulin, it only works for chulin. Also, the meiser, he won't be able to have meiser sheni. He would have to have intention when going to the mikvah for meiser sheni in order to be able to eat meiser sheni. So without any intention at all, he's mutter to have chulin. And even with intention for chulin, it ends at chulin. He can't have meiser sheni. Ezvei, we have a contradiction. Toval v'lo uchzak, also from the Mishnah in Chagiga, if he went to the mikvah with no intention whatsoever. Ki'ilu lo toval, it's as if he didn't go to the mikvah at all. No. So come on. Is that not saying that when you go to the mikvah without any intention, you're left with nothing? My love, ki'ilu lo toval klal. If you went to the mikvah without intention, it's as if you didn't go to the mikvah whatsoever. Lo, no. Ki'ilu lo toval l'meiser. If you go to the mikvah with no intention at all, it's as though you didn't have. It's as though you didn't go to the mikvah for meiser. Avol tova l'chulin, but it does work for chulin. Who suffered achuye ka madchilei? Rava got a weird feeling about this. Something didn't feel right. He thought maybe Rav Nachman was just trying to push him off. I mean, the Mishnah says, "Tova v'lo uchza kilu lo tova." Come on. The Mishnah says he goes to the mikvah without any kavanah. It's as if you don't go to the mikvah at all. Come on, it means it's for nothing. Rav Nachman's coming and saying, no, it means he didn't go to the mikvah for meiser sheni. Really? Rav felt something wasn't right. So, nafak dak, so he went out and he researched. Ve'ashkach, and he found a brisa that actually confirmed what Rav Nachman was saying. This sanya that we learned in the brisa, tova v'lo uchzak, mutter l'chulin v'asur l'meiser. That if a person goes to the mikvah without any intention at all, he is nonetheless mutter to have chulin. He just can't have meiser sheni. Givaldig. No. So there you have it. Going to the mikvah without any intention at all allows you to consume chulin. And going back to our initial question about a nida who landed in a mikvah without any intention, she's mutter to have chulin, i.e. she's mutter to her husband. It explains Rav's position. So Abai says to Rav Yosef, shouldn't this be problematic for Rav Yochanan? Rav Yochanan says that she's asura to her husband. But if we're saying that her husband is chulin, and somebody goes to the mikvah without any intention is mutter for chulin, is this not an indication that she should be mutter to her husband? Why is Rav Yochanan saying she's asura to her husband? Amar lach Rav Yochanan u'da'amar Rav Yonasan ben Yosef. Rabbi Yochanan would say that he holds like Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef. The Sanya we learn in the Bible, Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef. Omer says the very holy Rabbi Yonasan ben Yochanan ben Yosef. V'chubas. Let's read the pasuk. The pasuk says v'abeged o ashesiu ha'erev o kol kli or ha'or asher tchabes v'sor mehem an noga v'chubas shenis v'tor. Who can tell me what this is talking about? He's talking about saras of clothing. That if a person goes to a kohen and says, look, it looks like I might have some saras on my clothing. The kohen says, okay, let's put it away for a week. Let's see what it looks like at the end of the week. But at the end of the week, it looks exactly the same. So they wash it, and then they put it away for another week. Now, this pasuk is talking about, let's read it again. So the clothing, if at the end of the second week, right, so at the end of the first week, nothing changed. So they washed it and put it away for a second week. If now at the end of the second week, after having washed it, the tzaras is gone, or whatever was there was gone, the chubas shenis v'tar, now you just put it, so you wash it a second time, this time in the mikvah, and it's tahor. So Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef says, v'chubas, once we already said that you put it, you're washing it, obviously it's a second time, right? Because a week ago you washed it once. So obviously with this time, when you're washing it, but really putting it in the mikvah, of course it's the second time. Matam lo mashenis, why is the Torah counting for us and saying a second time? Because makish tichboses shnia the tichboses rishon. It's to teach us to compare the second washing to the original washing a week earlier. Tichboses rishona ladas av tichbos shnia ladas. Just like the first washing was intentional, you intentionally washed it. So also the second washing, the mikvah, has to be intentional. If the clothing just falls into the mikvah, it won't work. You have to have intention. So Rabbi Yochanan holds like this brisa, holds like Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, that there does have to be basic intention even for chulin when going to the mikvah. Wait, but when originally the clothing was washed, it was with the intention of the kohen. The kohen was part of the process. Does this also need the intention of the kohen as well when washing the second time? Tamilomer v'taher, and it will be tahor mikol makom, even without the intention of the kohen. Okay, Givaldi. So that's why Rabbi Yochanan says that mikvah is not going to work for chulin, either like Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, based on the scenario here with the tzaras that we require das. Maskif la Rav Shimi bar Ashi. Now Rav Shimi bar Ashi asks a question. Umiyam Rabbi Yochanan achi. Would Rabbi Yochanan really say thus? Say this? Would Rabbi Yochanan really say that going to the mikvah with no intention means, right, if we're going to the mikvah with no intention, has no results at all, according to Rabbi Yochanan? Is that really true? You're still also for chulin? Of course we know Rabbi Yochanan, one of Rabbi Yochanan's famous shitas, his halacha kistam mishnah, that if you have an unattributed mishnah, we paskin that way. V'tnanim, we learned in our mishnah, nafla sakin v'shachato, if a wind blows a knife off of a ledge and it slaughters while it's falling, even though it's a perfect shechita psula. When we say in the Gemara, taima de nafla, the reason is because it fell on its own. Ha'ipila, who? But if a person would have pushed it off the ledge, kshera v'afagav michavin, the shechita would be kshera even though there was no kavana. We say, who is the Tana who says there's that no kavana is required, is necessary for shechita? And Rava says it's Rab Nosson. And we see that here we have an unattributed mishnah, pasking like Rab Nosson, that no kavana is necessary by shechita. So if we have a stam mishnah, wouldn't Rabbi Yochanan say that we paskin like this mishnah, that you don't need kavana by shechita, and if you don't need kavana by shechita, should we not say that you also don't need kavana by mikvah? Friends, what do you think about that? So add for the Gemara 1 second. These are two different scenarios. Shechita and mikvah. Two different things. B'shechita, afilu Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, modi. By shechita, yeah, Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan would agree with the stam mishnah, of course, that you don't need kavana. We've learned a few times already. For example, at the mamish, the last line of Masechta Menachis, and also on Daf Yud Gimel of Masechta Chullin, and also comes up in Zvachim, I believe, that misasik b'kodshim is possible when there's no kavana for shechita. When it comes to kodshim, it's possible. Michlad Chulin lo binan kavana, implying okay, if by kodshim it's possible, fine. Implying that by chulin, it's okay. You don't need kavana by chulin. So even Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef would agree that by shechita you don't need kavana. However, by mikvah you do need kavana according to Rabbi Yochanan. It's a different thing. V'Rabbanan, now the rabbis who say that when it comes to throwing the knife against the wall and it shechts a sheep along the way with no intention at all, Reb Nosson had said it's kosher, but the Chacham had said it's possible. What about the fact that we said that misasik b'kodshim is possible, but by chulin it should be okay? Why are the rabbis saying it's possible without kavana? Nehidelo ba'inon kavana lezvicha. Well, they're going to argue, even though when it comes to chulin, it's true. You don't need kavana to shecht it with the intention of being able to make it kosher to now eat. But l'chaticha b'inon, you do have to have the basic intention that I'm cutting these things. You know, I'm cutting these simanim. You have to have basic intention. Sure, maybe if you don't have intention, I'm cutting these simanim in order to make the animal kosher. You don't have that intention. But you can't just throw a knife against the wall and, oh wow, didn't even realize there was a sheep there. That won't work, according to the rabbis. Rava Beha Zochinu, Rab Nosson the Rabbanan says, Rava, I agree with Reb Nosson here that, look, we're saying by kachim, you need kavana, you don't need kavana by shchita. Miksiv v'chatachta v'zavachta ksiv. The pasuk doesn't say v'chatachta and you will cut them, right? By shchita of chulin, right? It says v'zavachta mi bekarcha mitzoncha. It doesn't say v'chatachta. It says v'zavachta. Iba'inon kavana l'chaticha afil zvicha nami libai. If you need kavana for the cutting, then you'll also need the kavana for the zvicha. If you don't need kavana for the zvicha, you don't need kavana for chaticha. Therefore, it's like Reb Nosson. Look, when it comes to kachim, you need to have kavana. Misasik b'kachim is possible. When it comes to chulin, even if you're just throwing a knife against the wall and it happens to slice across the neck of a sheep, that is okay. You don't need to have kavanah not to cut anything, not to make anything kosher. It works. By kachim it doesn't work. By chulin it works. And finally, what is the scenario where this nida somehow ended up in the mikvah? What happened? If we're going to say that her friend shoved her into the mikvah, well, that works. What's the proof? Well, let's go weiter for a second. If it was her friend who pushed her into the mikvah, not only would it work, it would even work for truma. We learn in the Mishnah Masechta Nida, if you have a person who's deaf and mute, or is dumb, is blind, is nichufadaita, they've gone mad. If they have somebody, a caretaker, if they have somebody to take care of them, now these are people who don't have proper das. But if they have somebody who can take care of them and can determine when they're no longer a nida and can take them to the mikvah, that makes them tahor. So therefore, if it's her friend who, forced her into the mikvah, whatever, that would work. That would be okay. Reb Papa, the Reb Nosson, shenafla min hagesher, says Reb Papa, according to Reb Nosson, who says that right when it comes to shechita, you don't have to have any kavanah for shechita at all. You can just be throwing a knife against the wall. If it happens to shecht, it works. It's okay. So you're also, even if she just fell off a bridge and landed in a mikvah, it works. Well, the Rabbanan, according to Rabbanan, who said that you have to have at least a basic intention for what you're doing, even if it's not an intention for like shechita to make it kosher, but you have to have intention to be like cutting the simanim. So also you have to have intention to be going into the water at some level. Sheyarda lehaker, she went in to cool down, and then she just kind of fell in. So because she had some basic intention there, it works according to the rabbis. Friends, that was Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Chulin. We wrapped up the previous Mishnah. We talked about how if you want to be able to slaughter with just one long slice, you have to make sure that the knife is long enough that when you complete the slice, the amount that extends past the neck of the animal is at least equal to the width of the neck of the animal. And then we also talked about if you're going to just be going back and forth while slicing, then you can even just use even just a scalpel can work for that, though you can't have any horns on that scalpel. We then got to a new mikvah. What? We got to a new Mishnah where we discuss, where the Mishnah says that if a knife just falls off of a ledge and shechts perfectly, it doesn't work only because there was no human, says the Gemara, only because there was no human involvement whatsoever. If there is at least basic human involvement, however, so then, right, meaning if a human you pushed it off the ledge, well then, even if there was no intention to shecht, and then a sheep just happened to be there and it sliced right through the neck perfectly, that would be okay as long as, right, since there was a human involvement, we say that this is the shita of Reb Nosson, that you don't have to have kavana when it comes to shechita. We then got into a whole big discussion about mikvah. We saw machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav, that if a person falls into if a nida falls into the mikvah without any intention, so they both agree that she will not be able to eat truma. However, Rav says she will be able to be with her husband because going to the mikvah, even without any intention, works for chulin. Her husband is chulin. She can be with her husband. Reb Yochanan, however, says that she can't be with her husband because no kavana, without any kavana, she's going to be usher for chulin. Friends, that was right. We then basically the rest of the daf we were kind of looking for a source for how we know that you don't need chulin and that you don't need any kavana for chulin. Friends, that was daf lamed aleph of Masechta Chulin. I will catch you all later. Cheers.